An HOA president named Karen had been illegally enforcing fake violations against homeowners for years. She'd stolen money, created fake fines, and threatened residents with false liens. But she got cocky. She decided to set up one final sting operation against a homeowner who'd been questioning her authority. What Karen didn't know was that the homeowner had already contacted the county sheriff. The sheriff had been building a case for months, collecting evidence of Karen's crimes. When Karen tried to execute her sting, the sheriff was waiting with cameras, recording devices, and the evidence needed to arrest her on the spot. What happened that day would end Karen's reign of terror, expose massive HOA fraud, and result in criminal charges that would send her to prison. Karen Mitchell had been HOA president of Sunnybrook Estates for 7 years. During that time, she transformed a peaceful community into a zone of fear and corruption. Karen didn't have a job. Her income came entirely from HOA fraud. She created fake violations, assessed fraudulent fines, and threatened liens against homeowners who questioned her authority. She'd stolen over $400,000 from the HOA in 7 years. Karen maintained power through intimidation. When residents complained, she threatened to foreclose on their homes. When residents requested financial records, she claimed they were in the process of being compiled and never actually provided them. When residents gathered to challenge her authority, she scheduled votes at times when working families couldn't attend, ensuring her slate of board members always won re-election. The residents of Sunnybrook Estates were trapped. They'd bought homes in what they thought was a normal community, only to find themselves under the control of a corrupt dictator who had legal authority to threaten their homes with foreclosure. One resident, a man named Robert Martinez, finally decided to fight back. Robert had received $15,000 in fines over 2 years for violations that either didn't exist or were completely fabricated. He documented everything. He took photos. He recorded violations notices. He kept detailed records. Robert contacted the county sheriff's office and filed a formal complaint about Karen's conduct. He presented evidence of fraud, illegal fines, and threats of foreclosure based on violations that weren't real. The sheriff, a woman named Elizabeth Torres, took the case seriously. She dealt with HOA corruption before and knew it was a widespread problem. Sheriff Torres began her own investigation. Over the course of 3 months, Sheriff Torres interviewed residents, reviewed HOA records, and documented Karen's crimes. She found fines assessed for violations that were never photographed or documented. Fines assessed for violations that contradicted the official HOA bylaws. Fines assessed to residents who questioned Karen's authority. Money transfers from HOA accounts to Karen's personal accounts. Fake vendor invoices used to justify HOA spending. Residents threatened with foreclosure for non-payment of fraudulent fines. The evidence was overwhelming. Karen had committed fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Sheriff Torres decided on a strategy. She would allow Karen to attempt one more fraud scheme, this time against Robert, and she would catch her in the act with full documentation. Robert worked with Sheriff Torres to set up the sting. They agreed that Robert would publicly question Karen's authority at an HOA meeting. This would provoke Karen into creating a fake violation against him, which was exactly what she always did to people who challenged her. Karen had a pattern. When someone questioned her, she would find or create a reason to fine them. She would escalate the fines to punitive levels. She would threaten foreclosure. She would destroy the residents' will to resist. On the day of the HOA meeting, Robert stood up and said, "I have a question about the HOA finances. I'd like to see the detailed budget breakdown for the past year." Karen's face went red. "Those records are confidential," she said sharply. "They're not confidential," Robert said calmly. "State law requires HOAs to provide financial records to residents upon request. I'm requesting them." Karen was furious. "You don't get to question me, Robert. You've never respected authority. You're the reason this community is falling apart." She continued, her voice rising. "In fact, I'm putting you on notice right now. I drove by your house yesterday, and your mailbox is 12 inches too tall according to our bylaws. You're receiving a violation notice and a fine of $500. There was no mailbox violation. Robert's mailbox was exactly the right height. Sheriff Torres had personally verified it before the meeting. Karen continued her sting, warming up. "And your landscaping is overgrown. That's another $300 fine. You have 30 days to pay, or we'll place a lien on your property." Robert's landscaping was impeccable. He'd had a professional landscape company work on it the week before. "Those violations aren't real," Robert said clearly. "You're creating them because I questioned your authority. I don't care what you believe, Karen snapped. Pay the fines or face foreclosure. That's how this works. What Karen didn't know was that sheriff's deputies were in the hallway with recording equipment. They were documenting everything. They had video. They had audio. They had witnesses. After the HOA meeting ended, Robert left the building. Karen stayed behind to bask in her power and what she thought was another successful intimidation. She didn't realize the meeting room doors were about to open. Sheriff Elizabeth Torres walked into the room, followed by 3 deputies. Karen's face went white. Karen Mitchell, Sheriff Torres said, her voice steady and official, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, abuse of power, and threatening false foreclosure. Karen tried to stand up. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. This is my community. You're not arresting anyone, Sheriff Torres said firmly. I am. And we have extensive documentation of your crimes. The sheriff's deputies began photographing the room. They documented the meeting in progress. They had documentation of Karen creating fake violations against Robert in real time. More deputies entered the room with boxes. We're seizing all HOA records, Sheriff Torres announced. This is now an official law enforcement investigation. Karen tried to protest. I demand to know what you're talking about. I haven't done anything illegal. Sheriff Torres read her rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Karen was placed in handcuffs. She was walked out of the HOA meeting room in front of dozens of shocked residents. The image of Karen being arrested became the defining moment of the Sunnybrook Estates corruption case. She was taken to county jail. She was booked on multiple charges. Her bail was set at $50,000. Over the following days, Sheriff Torres' investigation expanded. Deputies seized Karen's personal computers and found detailed records of her fraud scheme. They found email communications where she bragged about intimidating residents. They found spreadsheets showing how she diverted HOA money to her personal accounts. The investigation also revealed that Karen had been conducting these schemes for 7 years. The total amount stolen exceeded $400,000. The number of residents she defrauded exceeded 150. Karen was formally charged with embezzlement, 25 counts, fraud, 30 counts, abuse of power, threatening false foreclosure, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud for using electronic communications in her schemes. The charges carried a total potential sentence of 45 years in prison. Karen's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution refused. There was too much evidence. The crimes were too egregious. The victims were too numerous. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Victim after victim testified about how Karen's actions had devastated their lives. Residents described panic attacks, financial hardship, and the trauma of living under her control. One elderly woman, Margaret, tearfully described how Karen had threatened to foreclose on her home when she couldn't pay a $2,000 fine for a violation that didn't exist. Margaret was on a fixed income and couldn't afford a lawyer to fight back. Another resident, David, talked about how he couldn't sell his home because the false liens Karen had placed on his property made the title unmarketable. Expert witnesses testified about the financial crimes. They showed how Karen had systematically siphoned money from the HOA. They presented detailed forensic accounting showing her deliberate fraud. Karen testified in her own defense, but her story didn't hold up. When confronted with the evidence, she offered no credible explanation. She claimed she was just enforcing HOA rules, but the evidence showed she was inventing rules specifically to target people who challenged her authority. The jury found Karen guilty on all charges. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison, plus 5 years of probation after her release. She was ordered to repay $400,000 in restitution to the residents she'd defrauded. But the consequences extended beyond Karen's imprisonment. Sheriff Torres' investigation triggered a statewide review of HOA practices. The state legislature passed new laws. 1. HOA financial transparency requirements. All HOAs must provide detailed financial records to residents quarterly. 2. Illegal fine prohibition. HOAs cannot assess fines for violations not listed in official bylaws. 3. Foreclosure restrictions. HOAs cannot foreclose on properties for fines under $3,000. 4. Audit requirements. All HOAs must undergo annual independent audits. 5. Criminal penalties. HOA officers who commit fraud face mandatory prison sentences. Sunnybrook Estates was placed under state receivership. A court-appointed administrator took over and began reversing Karen's illegal actions. Residents received refunds for fraudulent fines. False liens were removed from property records. The HOA was restructured with new leadership and real oversight. The residents formed a new HOA board with actual transparency and accountability. Monthly meetings were held with full financial reporting. Residents could vote on all major decisions. The community transformed from a zone of fear into a legitimate neighborhood association. Robert Martinez was recognized as a hero in the community. He'd been willing to stand up to Karen and work with law enforcement to expose her crimes. His courage had protected 150-plus residents from ongoing fraud. The Sunnybrook Estates case became a model for how to address HOA corruption. Other sheriff's departments began establishing HOA fraud task forces. The state attorney general created a specific division to investigate HOA crimes. Karen's conviction sent a clear message: HOA officers were not above the law. Using HOA power to commit fraud, embezzlement, and abuse would result in criminal prosecution and prison time. News outlets covered the case extensively. National media picked up the story. HOA president's 18-year prison sentence exposes massive fraud scheme. The publicity raised awareness about HOA corruption nationwide. Homeowners across the country began demanding financial transparency from their HOAs. Residents who'd been abused by corrupt HOA leaders came forward. Other fraud cases were opened and prosecuted. The profound lesson extends far beyond one HOA. Corruption thrives when there's no oversight and when victims are isolated and powerless. Karen believed she was untouchable because she had formal authority. She didn't understand that formal authority doesn't exempt you from criminal law. When one person is brave enough to document crimes and work with law enforcement, it can expose massive fraud affecting hundreds of people. Robert didn't have power, but he had evidence and courage. Sheriff Torres didn't have easy authority over an HOA, but she had law enforcement power and the will to use it. Together, they dismantled a fraud scheme and transformed a corrupt organization. That's how systemic corruption falls, not through individual complaints that get ignored, but through someone being willing to escalate to authorities with documentation and evidence. ***. This story reveals an important truth. HOA corruption is real, widespread, and often goes unpunished because residents don't know they can file complaints with law enforcement. But when someone documents crimes and reports them to the sheriff, county prosecutors, or state attorneys general, real justice becomes possible. Karen thought she was protected by her position. She learned that no position protects you from criminal law. Have you ever experienced HOA abuse or fraud? Have you ever witnessed someone stand up to corrupt authority and win? Have you ever seen law enforcement take action against institutional corruption? Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more shocking stories about HOA corruption, justice, and what happens when powerful people get caught red-handed. Hit that notification bell right now so you never miss our latest uploads. ***. Comment below. Tell us about your HOA experiences, whether you've experienced corruption or witnessed someone stand up to it. Or share a moment when you saw law enforcement take action against institutional abuse. Your story could inspire thousands of people to report HOA fraud and demand accountability. ***. Thanks for watching. Karen's story reminds us that HOA corruption is a crime, and crimes have consequences. If you're experiencing HOA fraud, abuse of power, or illegal fines, don't suffer in silence. Document everything. Photograph violations. Save all communications. Record meetings if it's legal in your state. Then contact your county sheriff, county prosecutor, or state attorney general. Report the crimes. Provide your documentation. Law enforcement has the power to investigate, prosecute, and punish HOA criminals. Karen thought she was untouchable. She learned the hard way that nobody is above the law. See you in the next video where we'll share another incredible story about corruption being exposed and criminals facing justice. ***. Rocket.